Hi. I have no idea if you can hear me right now. Let me tell you this story. Earlier this week, my entire computer stopped working, right? So I had to send it into the shop, and now I am on an older computer, and I have spent the past little while just trying to reconnect everything, making sure everything works here and there. And I am at the point where I have no clue if anything is working right now, but I'm committed to doing this. So we're going to see. I don't even know if you can hear me. I hope you can hear me to the standard two of you who are here in the comments. There are several, thank you, three people. There are several stories I want to get to this week, but I I know I talked about Coach Joe Kennedy at Bremerton High School last week because Friday night, last time I recorded, that was the night of his first game back on the field when he was gonna do his prayer thing. And of course, he's back in the news this week for entirely predictable reasons that we have to talk about. I want to bring up this thing because I think this is a good segue into what this story is really all about here. And again, let me just give you some background because I'll clip this and put this as a separate thing on YouTube. But Coach Kennedy, Joe Kennedy, he used to work at Bremerton High School in the state of Washington. He was a assistant football coach for that team. And I think around like 2015, he said, my religion requires me to, Jesus said, when the final whistle blows at a high school football game, I have to go to the 50-yard line at midfield. I have to get on my knees and I have to pray. And if the entire world joins me when I do that, so be it. But you know what? Praying at midfield is part of my religion. And so he started doing that. But again, any coach will tell you just because the final whistle blows, you're still on the clock as an employee. You can't just stop doing your job to go do your religious duty because you still have an obligation to the students and you're still representing the district and the public school. So that's why the district said you can't do that. You can pray in your mind all you want, you can pray afterwards, that's fine. But like, this is coercive. This is wrong. You can't do it. Long story short, he filed a lawsuit because he resigned from his position when they said you got to stop doing that. He sued, saying they were violating his religious beliefs. This went all the way. He lost every case. He lost the appeals. He lost the en banc ruling with a bigger appeals court. And finally, it got to the Supreme Court, which is really where the right wing people wanted it all along. And the Supreme Court had to decide, should we take up this case? Okay. And before they made that decision of whether or not to take up the case, Americans United for Separation of Church and State, which was representing one of the law firms representing the school district, they asked the Supreme Court, basically saying, maybe don't take up this case. And they said there's a good reason we don't want you to take up this case because it's not relevant. And the reason they said that is they said, if the Supreme Court issues a ruling, it has to help the people who you are ruling in favor of. And in Joe Kennedy's case, he's saying, I need you to rule in my favor because I want to get back onto the football field, but they won't let me. And Americans United said that your ruling here in his favor would not help him because this is what they asked the Supreme Court. Check this out. This is before the court took up the case. They said, according to public records for this county in Florida, Joe Kennedy now owns a home in Pensacola, which he purchased in 2020. It is our understanding that Joe Kennedy and his wife live in their Pensacola home. Additionally, Joe Kennedy is apparently a registered voter in Florida. Basically saying this guy lives in Florida. So, like, what do you think he's going to do? And then they added here, assistant coaches for the Bremerton High School varsity football team are expected to be physically present at the school to perform year-round coaching duties, including, let's see this, helping in the weight room 3 days a week during the winter, attending and supervising 2 weeks of spring football. being involved in the summer program, which spans several days a week the entire summer. You're at a 4-day camp all summer. You got to be there 6 days per week during the football season for a few months. You're at film breakdown. All these games, basically saying this is a year round position. I know it's an assistant coach. I know it's a high school, but this is not a short term gig. You don't just show up for like 2 months, September, October, November, whatever the season is, and then get out. And by the way, if you're like at it, you're doing all of this, they said, for how much? Look at the amount. They even said at current rates, the total annual stipend for Joe Kennedy's coaching position is $5,304. So their point, the reason they are saying all this is to say, why would this guy want to fly back, move back permanently to Washington State for this? And they actually wrote in this thing, even if there was any, I'm going to skip down here somewhere, even if there was some genuine possibility that he might decide to leave his home. Let me blow this up a bit here. To leave his home in Pensacola, Florida, and move approximately 2,800 miles back to Bremerton, Washington for a $5,304 part-time coaching job. Basically saying you can't just give it to him. Even if he promised he would do that, the facts of the case say he doesn't even live there anymore. Hey, Supreme Court, you have every right to toss out this case without adjudicating it, and it would be totally within your right to do that. I mean, I'm not a lawyer here. Americans United said, we really don't want the Supreme Court to take up this case. We know exactly how this will turn out. We are trying to give them a way to get out of this. Here's a way, Supreme Court, for you to save face. You could toss the case on mootness because this case doesn't have any effect on Joe Kennedy, even if he won. And you could do that and no one could be mad at you because you have every reason to do that. Well, guess what Joe Kennedy's lawyer said in response to all this? Joe Kennedy's lawyers wrote to the Supreme Court, and here's what they said. This case is not remotely moot. Petitioner Joe Kennedy believes that he was unconstitutionally removed from his job, and he wants a declaration of his reinstatement. Yeah. Look at this. He remains ready, willing, and able to return to his job just as soon as his constitutional rights are vindicated. It is really that simple. And a phone call to opposing counsel would have confirmed as much and saved the parties like all this hassle. Yeah. Basically saying, look, Supreme Court, if you give us a victory, Joe Kennedy is ready. He's ready to coach. He's ready to get back on the field and help those kids. So this is what they argued in front of the Supreme Court before they took up the case. And they said he's ready to resume the job he loves. So obviously, you know how this story ended, at least partly. Like the Supreme Court said, oh, we're totally taking up this case because look who's on the bench right now. It's 6 of us. They took up that case. They ruled in favor of Joe Kennedy and said, yeah, he can get back on the field. Neil Gorsuch is the guy who wrote the majority opinion, and he just lied. He lied throughout his majority opinion. He said Joe Kennedy was fired over his prayers. No, he wasn't. Joe Kennedy resigned. Gorsuch said said Joe Kennedy's prayers were quiet and personal. No, they weren't. They were mass spectacles. Sonia Sotomayor, in her dissent, showed a picture of one of the prayers, and she's like, nothing about this is quiet or personal. Neil Gorsuch said Joe Kennedy's prayers were not coercive. They were. In fact, briefs filed with the Supreme Court quoted students and their parents saying, yeah, we kind of felt obligated to join in the prayer because, he's the coach and we got to get on his good side and all of this sort of stuff. So it was a bad decision. So I say all that to say, of course, Joe Kennedy last week, as I mentioned, he was coaching again. It took like a year for all the paperwork to go through and for all the for him to stop being a Christian celebrity for like 2 minutes. Apparently, he spent the past year writing a memoir called Average Joe, the Coach Joe Kennedy story. As if anyone cares about this guy's life beyond your 2 minutes of prayer fame here. He was writing that with a ghostwriter. That book comes out next month, so he's hyping it up. They're working on a movie about this guy's life, which again, what do you make a movie about? This is like a 2-minute story, but that movie's being made by the God's Not Dead people. He was consulting with Republican presidential candidates. At least Ron DeSantis met with him personally seeking an endorsement. And Joe Kennedy's like, buddy, I'm on Team Trump, because of course he is. This guy's giving paid speeches. He talked about maybe starting a ministry of some sort. He created a website to promote himself. So he's been busy. He's not really interested in coaching right now. But again, last week was their first game. He's back on the field. And the question is like, well, so did this guy move back to Bremerton, Washington? Answer, no. According to the Seattle Times last week, he was house sitting in Bremerton, and he and his wife have talked about, I'm quoting here, parking an RV on his sister's property in the area during football season, which that's not the same thing as actually moving there. He has not sold his house in Pensacola. And then last week, I don't think we got around to this, but this is what he did last week. At the end of the game, which Bremerton won, good for those kids, Joe Kennedy gets on the field and he starts to pray. And you could see what was interesting to me. I saw a video of this online. What was interesting is he did get to midfield after the game. He walked to midfield. And yeah, there were reporters there. There were cameras there documenting all of this. You know what you don't see there? You don't see kids surrounding him. It was a 10-second prayer. It was actually like quiet and brief, but it's not like there were masses surrounding him. According to articles, there was like a smattering of applause, but it wasn't like some standing ovation or anything like that. This guy did his thing. People gave him golf claps, like a handful of people in the crowd. Yeah, there were a lot of articles written about it because you know why? Because the Supreme Court, all of that was for this moment right here. It was so he could do this shit on the field. So yeah, there was media attention. You know what else? Because he won that lawsuit in the Supreme Court, the school district is obligated to pay his lawyers, I think, like $1.7 million. Some of that's going to come from insurance, but like, yeah, it's a costly thing this guy did to his district. And then he did it. And it seemed like no one really cared, which is hilarious, but he did it. And then a day after all of that, a couple days after all of that happened, the most predictable thing in the world happened, which is Joe Kennedy announced that he was resigning. He said, I'm quitting. Earlier this week, he said, I'm out. And actually, he sent the resignation letter to the district at 4 a.m. on Wednesday. And this is from the Seattle Times here. He said he's resigning due to a family health situation and what he described as a deteriorating situation at the Bremerton School District. First of all, a family health situation? That's interesting because as far as last week when he was giving interviews, didn't mention that. He didn't say there was anything happening. You know what he did say when people asked him like, so are you here for the long haul? Are you going to be here for the next game and everything like that? He's like, I don't want to talk about the next game. Who knows what's going to happen in the future? Like, we all knew this was happening, but he didn't mention there was any health issues. So that's interesting. I'm not saying he's lying about it. I am saying it's kind of weird that this big health issue that prevents you from moving back home suddenly sprang up right at the time everyone stopped caring about Joe Kennedy. So that's one thing. And then he said there's a deteriorating situation at the Bremerton School District. In fact, according to his resignation letter from the Seattle Times, they got a copy of it. He said, it is apparent that the reinstatement ordered by the Supreme Court will not be fully followed after a series of actions meant to diminish my role and single me out in what I can only believe is retaliation by the school district. You could see it right there. Like retaliation. What did they do? What's the retaliation? I have no clue. He didn't describe it. How are they diminishing his role? I have no idea. How are they singling him out? I don't know. None of that makes any sense, and he's not describing it. You know what the district did do? Earlier this year, last school year, after the Supreme Court's decision, they passed a new policy regarding prayer at public school functions. And it basically said coaches can pray as long as they are not actively supervising players, which means after the final whistle blows, yeah, Joe Kennedy can do his thing. The district also said you got to keep your distance from students at the beginning of the prayers. So, in order to make sure there's no coercion going on, you got to be alone when you start to pray. After you start to pray, if students on their own want to surround you and pray with you, they can do that. And we're not going to do anything about it. We're not going to punish the coach for that. So basically, the district passed a policy saying everything Joe Kennedy wanted to do and that the Supreme Court gave him the right to do, he could do. He got everything he wanted. And so what is he so mad about? I don't know. I think he just wants to blame anyone he can because the alternative is saying, all right, I did the thing I wanted to do. I quit. I'm going to go be a Christian celebrity now. That's what's really going on. But he doesn't want to say that because it'll hurt the brand. So he's like, you guys, the school district is, everyone there is just being a dick to me. So I'm going to blame them and then I'm going to quit and I'm going to say it's because of the school district. Which doesn't. I am I am offended because I myself am a public high school coach of sorts. I don't do football, but I am a coach, and everyone who is a coach of any high school anything will tell you. And I've said this before, but like it is a sacrifice. You give up a lot of time. You don't get paid a lot of money. So why do you do it? You do it for the students. You do it because what you get from them is more valuable than a paycheck. When Kennedy decided years ago that he wanted to use his platform to advertise Christianity, that's when you know he doesn't give a shit about the students. He's doing this for himself. He is the main priority for himself. And by the way, when he returned to coaching, that didn't change. You know what did change? The makeup of the student body, because the athletes who were playing football last Friday night are not the students who were around, in 2015. We've gone through a couple generations of students here, and it seems like all the new kids are like, "Oh god, it's this guy." They didn't want anything to do with him, apparently. You know what's weird too? He totally could have gotten everything he wanted and taken the high road here. He could have said, I'm glad I won the Supreme Court case, but I think if I come back onto the field and if I am an assistant coach once again, it'll take attention away from the students, and that's not fair to them. The kids have a right to play with the spotlight on them. They're the ones playing for a scholarship. They're the ones who may not play football again. I don't want the attention to be on me. I want it to be on them. So I'm going to stay in Florida. But of course, he would never do that because he's a narcissist. He has to have the attention on himself. I think it's only after he realized the media is going away now because no one's going to be there for the next home game, which is not tonight, by the way. I think it's next week. Like, he's not going to stick around to coach when no media is around to follow him and the cameras aren't there to quote everything he says. So he's like, all right, peace out. I'm going to go do my rounds at churches across the country and give speeches. There was a really interesting tweet I want to show you here. This is from David Brody, who is a Christian nationalist. He's a fake journalist. Like, he interviewed Trump a few times when Trump was president. And can you imagine, like, what would you ask Trump if you're a journalist and you get an interview face-to-face time with Donald Trump? David Brody just asked him softball question after softball question. But check out what Brody wrote on Twitter here. Here is the statement from Joe Kennedy through his publicist regarding the fact that he has resigned. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, full context. This is the important bit. When I interviewed Coach Kennedy in Bremerton, Washington a few days ago, he told me he felt like an outsider after returning, and things were not the same. During Friday night's return, he spent long stretches of time by himself on the sidelines. He told me the school district and this lawsuit took a lot of the joy out of coaching. Yeah, the school district ruined Joe Kennedy's fun. It's the school district's fault, Like, the lawsuit was Joe Kennedy's decision. Capitalizing on his martyrdom was Joe Kennedy's decision. He could have just done the job and coached but he's not interested in coaching. Coaching is just the tool he is using to promote Christianity through the taxpayer funded job that he had. Like, you know what else takes joy out of football? Your coach hogging the spotlight. So if you're a student, yeah, the joy might have been sucked out of your victory in the first game of the season. But again, Joe Kennedy doesn't care. So, you know what would be hilarious? What if Joe Kennedy submitted his resignation and then the school district was like, no, we're not accepting this, buddy. You got to coach all season. We're forcing you to coach all season. How pissed off would Joe Kennedy be? He shouldn't be because he said he wanted to do that. But if he had to coach the rest of this season, he would be so mad. He couldn't do his paid speaking gigs everywhere where he pretends he's an actual coach who cares about kids. So I think as I speak right now, the Bremerton students, the football team, is playing its second game of the season. And if they win, I just want them to all the whole team go to midfield after the game, go to the 50-yard line, and do the biggest celebratory dance possible, and don't pray. And that's your way of sticking it to the coach who ditched you the second he had the chance to do it, right? Oh, that made me so mad. Why would he put everyone through that for his 10 seconds of prayer? All these years, millions of dollars for a 10-second stupid prayer that no one cared about, all for nothing. I mean, I will say maybe it's not for nothing because the Supreme Court didn't do it just for Joe Kennedy. The ruling was written so that a lot of coaches have the option of doing what he did. I haven't seen that play out yet. I haven't heard stories of other public high school football coaches like now demanding that they get to pray on the field after games, but it's possible, I guess. Like, this isn't just about Joe Kennedy, but he did get what he wanted. I I don't know if this is a fair comparison. I compared this a lot to like the Kyle Rittenhouse story. Granted, Kyle Rittenhouse has a body count, but his whole thing is I did one thing and then escaped without consequences, and now I'm going to ride that as long as I can. And even if people aren't paying attention anymore, I'm just going to let it go. I'm going to go with it. That's the only thing that is now important in that guy's life. And Joe Kennedy, too. Like, I don't know what the movie's going to be about because it can't be that interesting because he didn't do anything interesting, at least as far as the public concern is going to be. I don't know what he's going to do. Oh, one commenter pointed this out. I thought this too. Kennedy is definitely going to run for office somewhere. I would not put that past him because, again, he's living in Florida. You could launch a campaign for city council, for state house, something like that, on the fame that you currently have and with the Republicans you have in your corner. It's entirely possible. I wouldn't put that past him. I don't think he would do that just yet, though, because there's too much money to be made going around speaking about the case, talking about how I just wanted to be a coach, but no one will let me do it anymore, even though they totally were letting him do it. Um, so, this guy, so annoying. Shall we move on to a different story? Let's move on to a different story. I want you to look at this picture. It's just a screenshot I have to share with you here. And of course, it's disappeared. Here we go. I want to share this picture I'm finding. There it is. Where did I go? There it is. Okay. Check this out. Do you see what you are looking at here? This is a Christian cross, but it's actually a pier. And you could see with the title there, controversial cross-shaped pier in Jersey Shore town to open this weekend. And the story behind that, because that's not actually what I want to talk about, but it is a segue into what I want to talk about. There is a part of New Jersey called Ocean Grove. And basically, my understanding is different parts of the Jersey Shore, like various groups, get to manage that section of the Jersey Shore because it's not all just public beaches everyone can use. You can sell tickets and make sure people have permits so they can get access to the beach. And that allows to pay for lifeguards and for upkeep and for things like that. And various groups run these different properties. In Ocean Grove, New Jersey, the group that does that happens to be a group that is very openly and devoutly conservative Christian. Technically, it's a Methodist group, but they're called the Ocean Grove Camp Meeting Association. And basically, they say we were founded as a Christian seaside resort, and we have a mission befitting that description. They say their goal is to help all generations know and grow in Jesus. And the thing is, this is one of this, it's a relationship that's been in the works for a long time. So they just kind of grandfathered their way into running this place. And so the question is, how does that actually play out? Because, of course, there are laws in New Jersey, so you can't just Christianize everything. But in 2007, that association was sued because same sex marriage, or at least civil unions, were legal in New Jersey at the time in 2007. And people wanted to get their civil union on the Boardwalk Pavilion in Ocean Grove. And the Christian group running it said, you can't do that. We're not allowing you to have access to the boardwalk. And they sued. And the judge said, yeah, that violates the state's anti-discrimination laws. So you can't ban gay couples from having their civil union ceremonies on the boardwalk. So what did they do in Ocean Grove? What did the Christian group do? They said, oh, well, then no one gets to use the boardwalk for their marriage ceremonies or their civil union ceremonies. Like, no one gets to have any fun. That's how we're responding to this. But basically, because they kind of run the show there, and because they raised the money to build that Christian pier, they were able to open it earlier this year. The old one was destroyed by Hurricane Sandy a decade ago. So they were like, well, we need to rebuild one. Let's do some fundraising for it. Oh, let's build it in the shape of a cross, which is totally secular. It's just a pier with a lot of places for people to stand. It has nothing to do with Jesus, even though they colored it. How did they color it? Like that, so you could see the cross. Like, everyone knows what they're doing here. That's who these people are. Okay, so why do I bring this up? Because the story that happened recently is that between Memorial Day and Labor Day, which is like 15 weeks total, no one was allowed to have access to the beach before noon on Sundays. The Christian group said, we have to go to church and you have to go to church. So no one gets access to the beach. And technically, they could just say, well, again, we're not saying non-Christians have access or not. Like, no one has access to the beach on Sundays. And also, we're putting padlocks and chains at the entrances, so no one has access. And the problem is, like, New Jersey state law, I believe, says people can access the beach during daylight hours. And this is a violation of state law. It actually prevents people with disabilities and wheelchairs from accessing the beachfront. So what is gonna happen there? So the Christian group says they have secular reasons for preventing people from using the beach. Let me show you what their statement was right here. This is a wild statement. The outcome of this closure, it enhances religious and secular quality of life experiences in Ocean Grove. During this 0.5% of the year on Sunday mornings, the view of the ocean from the OGCMA's boardwalk and pier is of sublime natural beauty without the visual elements of beach umbrellas, tents, and masses of people. Basically saying, yeah, we don't want anyone using the beach on Sunday mornings because it's pretty. We don't want like beach and towels and umbrellas ruining the landscape of the beach for the people who want to use the beach. That would be weird if you saw a towel on the beach. Like, what the hell are they talking about? There's another problem too, which is that this is according to the ACLU. They said there's another problem because there are badges that they sell to give access to the beach. Like, you have to pay money to the Ocean Grove, and then they say, okay, you have a right to use the beach here. That's how they pay for upkeep. That's legal. But the badge they give has a cross on it, which is like if your city's seal had a cross on it. You can't put a religious emblem, a religious symbol in something that the government runs. But again, even on that case, the ACLU said that raises serious legal concerns, but no one has filed a lawsuit yet. Not because of the beach closure, not because of the beach badges. And I don't necessarily understand why no one is going after them, because it seems like lawsuits are the only way you talk sense into these people. You force their hand, but no one really wants to do it because they kind of pay their own way to run this part of the state. Um, I don't know. It's not like anyone's saying you're not allowed to be Christian, but Christianity shouldn't be promoted the way it's being promoted in this place. And it's just extremely frustrating. I want to share one more thing with you here. This is the letter that a watchdog group sent to a state official about the beach closure. And it said here, this is their highlights. The Ocean Grove group, the Christian group, cannot limit vertical or horizontal public access to any dry sand beach area covered under this permit, nor interfere with the public's right to free use of the dry sand. The activities involve the use of chain and padlock barriers to deter public access to the beach during daylight hours. Basically saying, hey, state, they're violating the law. You got to do something about it. The state did send a letter to Ocean Grove saying, you guys, you can't do this. But the group didn't respond. They didn't care. They just ignored the state's warning. And now it's after Labor Day, so they're back to normal beach hours. So again, we're back to what's going to happen now. I don't know. Unless someone files a lawsuit, nothing is going to change. And if past is prologue, the only thing that gets this community to do anything is litigation. I'm sure church-state separation groups have reasons for not trying to take these people to court. If they think they're going to lose, they're not going to do it. But I'm struggling to figure out what their reason is to avoid this issue. I'm going to take a quick break for a second. I will say, hey, look, if you like this show, if you like the channel, you can support me on Patreon. If you want your questions answered, please leave a super like and I will check out the comments and all that. I enjoy reading these comments as well. And if you do have any questions, I will try to get to them even if you aren't doing a super like, but I will get to the super like questions as well. And it's much appreciated. This is sweet. Almost forgot to tithe. Please don't put me in hell. Sorry, it's a trick. You are going to hell, and I'm also keeping the money. That's how it works on this show. Let me jump to another story here that caught my attention. I'm going to show you this first. Let me show you this headline. That's not the one I want. That's the one I want. Okay. Check this out. Mega church helps California school board blur church state divide. And I remember this story because look at the date on this. April of 2015. This is a story that's like 8 years old now, but it involves Chino Valley School District in California. And the story here, which I think is worth talking about in some detail, it involves a school board with 5 members on it. And in 2015, the reason this school board made headlines is because 3 of the 5 members were super conservative and members of the same megachurch. And this is where it got annoying because what happened when 3 members of a megachurch took over a public school district? Well, you had Bible verses being recited during school board meetings. They were calling for people to accept Jesus at these meetings. They also pointed out in this article that the church in question was the Calvary Chapel Chino Hills megachurch, which is run by a guy named Jack Hibbs, who is better known today as like this really Trumpy, MAGA promoting Christian nationalist pastor. And here's what happened years ago. Those 3 members, their names are Andrew Cruz, James Na, Sylvia Orozco. They basically turned every school board meeting into a church service. There were prayers and rants against gay marriage at a school board meeting. I mean, That's what these things were turning into. And the Freedom from Religion Foundation sued that school board and those members specifically because they were praying at school board meetings. And the Freedom from Religion Foundation said you can't pray at school board meetings. You can barely get away with it at city council meetings, no matter what the Supreme Court says, but you absolutely cannot do it at school board meetings. Long story short, their Christian prayers, like a judge said, they lost. The school board appealed. The appellate court said, you lost. The school board appealed again to the full appellate court, and the full appellate court said, dude, you lost. The only option was going to the Supreme Court, which would have been even more money that they didn't have. And finally, the school board said, we're not fighting this anymore. We give up. We've lost this case. It cost the district over $282,000. That's what happened when megachurch members ran this school board. That's why they were making headlines in 2015. By the way, Andrew Cruz, one of those members, there's video of him where he goes on this long rant during the school board meeting, not just trashing gay marriage for some reason. He invokes the Confederate flag, and like not in a bad way. He argues that racism is done now because it's 2015. He's complaining about mandatory vaccination laws in California long before COVID. He's just going on this right wing, he wants to be a Fox News host type of rant, right? And then on the flip side of that, with one of those other board members, James Nah, Jack Hibbs was promoting him in a personal capacity, which is legal, but weird. And then the church's social media pages praised James Nah because he was trying to shove a Bible in public schools curriculum into the district, and he was successful in doing it. So the church is praising him through the church's social media. And at one point, reporters asked Jack Hibbs, like, why you're totally endorsing candidates from the pulpit, and that goes against IRS guidelines. You can't do that. Like, what do you have to say to critics who say you can't endorse a candidate from the pulpit? And let me show you what he said. This would be cooler if I had the timing all right, but here it is. Hibbs turns that restriction on its head, inviting candidates to his church and then telling the congregation he's not legally allowed to endorse anyone during the church service from behind the pulpit. So then I just walk in front of the pulpit, bless the candidates, and say how great he or she is and that I am voting for them. And then go back behind the pulpit. Ha ha ha. He's not actually behind the pulpit. Therefore, he's like, I can totally endorse candidates because I did it from here instead of here. Which, to be clear, that still violates the law, and that's not fair at all. And he's totally, his church has no business being tax exempt from the IRS. But guess what? The IRS doesn't do anything about it. Okay. The point is, this is what this school board was like in 2015, just constant Christianity, Christian nationalism throughout. So imagine my surprise this week when I see this headline in the Daily Beast: the California megachurch pushing public schools to the far right. And I saw that headline and I'm like, they can't be talking about Chino Valley again. But they were. Of course they were. Because it turns out that third member of their trifecta, Sylvia Orozco, she was not on the school board after all that stuff happened years ago. There was like this lull. And recently, last November, I believe, this woman whose picture you see here, her name is Sonia, what's her name? Sonia Shaw. She's also from that same megachurch. She got elected to the school board. And Andrew Cruz and James Knott are still there. So they got 3 members from the same megachurch on this 5-member board. And by the way, there's a 4th member who's just a conservative who's on the board who agrees with them about everything. So again, they've taken over the school board again. And guess what it looks like now? At this point, their latest thing is they're banning pride flags in classrooms because that's a priority. They want to force educators to inform parents if their kids identify as transgender or want to use a different pronoun or want to use a different name. They want teachers to have to inform parents about that, which is, I believe right now, California, like the Democrats in charge, are suing the school districts saying you can't pass a policy like that. And I also have to say, it's just a bad policy because if you're a parent and your kid is trans and going by a different pronoun and things like that, and they're not telling you about it, one, it shouldn't be the teacher's obligation to rat them out. But two, it probably means you're a shitty parent because your kid doesn't want to talk to you about this stuff. They don't trust you with it. And the reason it's bad policy is because if they don't trust you with it, then telling parents about what their kids are doing, it's putting the kids in danger. Because what are those anti trans parents going to do to their kids if they're doing something like that? So, horrible anti-child policy. Oh, and by the way, Sonia Shaw, that woman whose picture you saw, that who was newly elected from the megachurch, she hangs out with the Proud Boys. She's courting right-wing extremists. When the superintendent of schools in California appeared at a school board meeting to kind of talk to them about the anti-LGBTQ stuff they were doing, she shouted him down and then shut off his microphone. When the Daily Beast basically asked her, like, so you're basically doing Jack Hibbs' bidding, right? She's like, I've never met Jack Hibbs. I've never been brought up on stage. That's what she said. And check this out. I want to show you this from the article. Yeah. I've never met Jack Hibbs. I've never been brought up on stage, she said. 1 month later, however, Hibbs introduced her at the pulpit, telling his Sunday service that she's truly going up against the machine before leading a prayer for her victory. Shaw bowed her head as Hibbs lifted a hand in the air and declared, "She has decided, Lord, to take on the wokeism that is attacking our children." As if woke is a monster that is like, I don't know, going after kids, and not the school board that is literally passing policies to hurt kids. But she won that race, and now they're just taking over the district. I don't know how to say this more clearly. If you live anywhere in the US, the reason people like this get elected is not because they're in the majority. It's because most people don't care about school board elections or any local elections. Sonia over there won her election, I think, by like 300 some votes. There are so many people in that community that if they banded together solely on like what sort of policies do you want at the school board, it would not be for the things she is pushing. But the church and Jack Hibbs gets their members to vote for their people. So they can dominate a lot of these local races if no one else is paying attention. If the community got their shit together and said, listen, our schools are being destroyed. And by the way, if the schools are being destroyed, your property values are probably being destroyed too. So there is a selfish reason to get interested in this stuff. And that's kind of the only way to fix all this. There is one member of that school board who is more progressive and more liberal. And the Daily Beast said, like, so what do you think about all this stuff? And the bottom line is that guy said, look, the next election is November of 2024, and there are 3 seats up for grabs. That's the majority. If the community banded together against these Christian extremists who don't like kids, who want to just use it as a Sunday school and nothing else, if the community banded together, found a slate of 3 and only 3 candidates, and said, everybody, vote for these 3 people, they are sane. They could be Christian, by the way. There's nothing wrong with that. But these are sane candidates who care about schools and experts in the field, and they care for our children and making sure they have a good experience in high school. That's how you defeat these Christian nationalists who are taking over these school boards. But I know it's really hard to get people to care about these issues. It's hard to get them to vote in local elections in off years. Like most people, if they vote at all, they only do it when it's a presidential election. And it's hard to get people to vote in off year elections. You know what's even harder than like midterm elections? School board elections that take place some other time in the year. I used to be one of those people who didn't vote in local elections or didn't pay attention to local politics. And now I absolutely try my best to vote in every election I can, and I reach out on Facebook to like local progressive groups if I don't know the candidates, and it's like, hey, who should I be voting for? Where are your endorsements? Just make it easy for me here, because I haven't paid attention to these races, because usually they know the candidates, they know who's running. It's not hard to do. And if people watching this live stream or something like it don't care, well, then you're ceding ground to the Christian nationalists who absolutely care, and that would be a mistake. Please don't let that happen. All right, I'm pausing to take a look at some of these comments. Ooh, we have more comments here. What is this one? Xenon says, do one with Jessica. I assume you mean a live stream show with Jessica. I'll tell you what, we have talked about doing our podcast in front of cameras like this. The reason we haven't is more of a logistical thing, trying to get a couple cameras on us, even if it's a webcam, and trying to get it all in sync. If someone knows how to do that well and you think we could make it work without too much difficulty, please reach out to me. I would love to make that happen. It does mean I would have to actually like look decent when we record our podcast instead of showing up in like pajamas or something, which I usually do, or something like that. But we are trying to make that happen. Another question here. Are you going to finish reading the entire Bible? It only works if you finish it. That one stuff, I assume you're talking about the Bible series I was doing on YouTube, where I was going weekly through chapters of the Bible. The answer is, so last week I finished Deuteronomy, the fifth book of the Bible, the end of the Torah, basically. And I paused after that. The answer is, right now I have no plans to move forward chronologically. I'm not moving on to Joshua right now. However, I am trying to do a couple things. One of them is, can I just do specific chapters as a one-off? I actually have one of those in the queue that I have not shared yet, but I will in the near future. And the other thing I'm trying to do, I'm doing the research on it right now, is wondering if there's a different book of the Bible that I could do from start to finish without it being too overwhelming. And at some point, I will try to, if I can get the scripts done and I can record it and release it and all that, I'm going to do my best to get that done. And you'll hear about that as soon as I'm ready to launch. What I don't think I can do is just keep going the way I'm going right now, because you will not believe this. The Bible gets extremely repetitive, and I feel like I've said all I could for a lot of those sections. So I don't think I can do more than I am right now. But I will try to do more videos, even if they're not Bible videos. Let me jump to this story that cracked me up, because it involves this person uh, whose name is Allie Beth Stuckey. I'm going to remove uh, this comment here. Bye-bye. Yeah, let me talk about this story involving this conservative commentator named Allie Beth Stuckey. And that's her. She basically works for one of Glenn Beck's channels. She does a show. It's like one of those Ben Shapiro, Matt Walsh type of people, just conservative propaganda. You know the type. But apparently, I did not pay attention to this at the time, because all stupid things conservatives say just kind of blend together. But apparently, she did an episode last year, last August, a little over a year ago. And this is what she said. I'm going to try to do my best Allie Beth Stuckey impression, all right? I'm just going to say this. Dinosaurs never existed. You've got these bones. You've got these fossils. Let me show you. You can see it with me here. You've got these fossils, supposedly, and they supposedly date back millions of years. And then I think it's a bunch of nerds constructing this fantasy world that they think is awesome. Like, how do you know what the like skin of a pterodactyl looked like? How do you know what it sounded like? How do you know these things really? And like the different color patterns and all of that. How are you picking that up from the bones? If I were to pick like a theory, I'm like, ugh, I could see dinosaurs not being real. You're welcome. That's my impression of her. So her argument here is that dinosaurs didn't exist. No one knows anything about them. Fossils are just you have them, but they don't mean anything apparently. And then nerds just fill in the blanks. As Jessica mentioned on the podcast we recorded about this, it seems like her entire understanding of dinosaurs comes from Jurassic Park and nowhere else. So she thinks they are fictional monsters, and that any history books that mention them, it's just they're all guesses. They're not educated guesses. They're all just stabs in the dark. And here's the thing: I'm not a paleontologist, but dinosaurs are real. You know how we know they're real? Because their fossils sometimes include soft tissue that we can dissect and figure out. Like, for example, if they were covered in feathers, we know how muscular they were. We can tell which ways their eyes pointed because of their skulls. And yes, sometimes it requires filling in the blanks, like an evolutionary tree where we don't have every single link along the way. It's a connect the dot puzzle. Like, if you have enough, you get a sense of what the picture looks like. And it's not an educated guess, it's a pretty solid guess that can only be revised if you have better information. But here's an example of like how she operates. One time, here's an Instagram reel she once posted. Check this out. A new study suggests, there we go, suggests T-Rexes looked different than popular depictions. I'll be honest, I don't even know if that's true or not. There's probably some scientific paper that said we need to update our understanding of T-Rexes. But that's how science works. Someone says we have new information. We need to update our model of how this works. And here is her response to that in the reel. What have I been saying? No one actually knows what dinosaurs look like. The skin and sounds, especially, just a bunch of nerds recreating a Jurassic fantasy. So if you're looking at that, I think it's fair to say she does not believe dinosaurs exist. It's not a joke to her. That's what she actually believes about this stuff. And the reason I bring this up is because last week, guess who she interviewed? Let me show you. This is who she interviewed. Wait till you guess my reaction. Look at that. Can you see it? Were dinosaurs real? It's a conversation with Ken Ham, the creationist. She, the dinosaur denier, interviewed the dinosaur liar, Ken Ham. And if you don't know about Ken Ham, he's the young earth creationist behind the Creation Museum and Ark Encounter. But here's the thing about Ken Ham. Yes, he thinks dinosaurs are like 4,000 years old, which is off by like everything. But Ken Ham does definitely believe in dinosaurs. I know that because he makes a big deal about them in the Creation Museum. If you ever visit, you can ride a dinosaur. He has exhibits that have humans and dinosaurs in the same exhibit because he thinks they live together. As the joke goes, he thinks the Flintstones was a documentary. In the Noah's Ark place, I'm sorry, I should say in the Creation Museum, he has a skeleton, actual skeleton of an Allosaurus. It's like $1 million donation that was given to him by a guy named Michael Peroutka, who is a pro-secessionist neo-Confederate Republican, which is a whole different story. But the thing is, Ken Ham's whole thing is dinosaurs are real, and if you want to see some dinosaurs, come on down to Kentucky and come to his, money grabs, and you can ride one, as people do. So, again, it's ignorant, interviewing ignorant. It's not worth listening to the interview because nothing smart will get said. But I was curious, will Ken Ham call her out on the dinosaur denial thing? Does he even know about it? Does he do any research into it? I think he knows who she is. She's well known in conservative circles. So, like, he had every right to go into her house there or into her studio and say, "You're wrong. Dinosaurs are real. Here's how we know dinosaurs are real. Oh, and by the way, they're like 12 years old." Because, of course, he's going to say something stupid like that. So, how do you think that interview went? Of course, he didn't do that. He didn't call her out. Here's what Allie Beth Stuckey said during that interview. She said, I've jokingly talked about how dinosaurs don't exist, which is weird because she's never joked about it. She was always 100% serious saying dinosaurs did not exist. Like, there was no winking in her earlier comments. But when she asked Ken Ham, like, how do you know they existed and what they looked like? He kind of answered her correctly and then kind of fueled her conspiracy minded thinking here. You could check out what he said here. Well, first of all, you need to be skeptical about what they actually look like, simply because when they find dinosaur bones, they really only find a few. There's not that many. Like, wrong answer. Skeptical is not the right word there, because he's saying, oh, if any scientist tells you anything about dinosaurs, you don't have to trust them. That's what he means by that. And that's BS. We can be skeptical about every single fact because we don't know everything, but we know a lot. And it's not stabs in the dark, like I said. These are actual educated guesses based on the best available information. And you know what? Even if they found only a few dinosaur bones, which they haven't, they found a lot of them, that actually does tell you a lot of information. And then, first of all, do I believe in dinosaurs? Says Ken Ham. And the answer is yes. But who cares what he said after that? Because he said but. Like, what? Ken Ham has the opportunity to be the big guy here and say, you're wrong. Let me set you straight about something scientific, which is something he constantly wants to do. And even when this softball floats right into his lap, he's like, well, you might have a point, but let me try to convince you why I think dinosaurs might be real. Like, oh, come on. This is what happens when you put two conspiracy theorists together and they have a broken brain argument about a subject neither one knows anything about. And again, I'm not an expert, but here's the thing. If I wanted to talk about dinosaurs for an entire segment and I had a studio and enough, I assume, staff to work on this show, you could bring in a paleontologist. You could Google some shit before you get on air. You could ask some questions like, okay, I used to think this. Am I wrong? Can you tell me why I'm wrong? And of course, that's not how right wing propaganda ever works. I don't know who to be more angry at. Allie Beth Stuckey for spreading bullshit, which is her whole career, or Ken Ham for spreading a different kind of bullshit and then not calling out the bullshitter on her bullshit. Like, I don't know who to be mad at here. So now I think I just hate myself. I think that's the logical conclusion for all of this. It's just extremely frustrating. I'm going to pause. I'm just checking to see if there's any comments here that I missed. I will catch my breath here. Um, Feel free to leave questions in the comments. I would love to get to some of them while I look up the next thing I really wanted to talk about here. Oh, yes, there's a couple more things, and then we'll end it. If there's anything you want me to talk about, by the way, that's not news related, feel free to leave that in the comments too, and I might get to that as well. Let me jump to this story while I do that. This involves Christian pseudo historian David Barton. David Barton, of course, famously a liar. He's a guy who said he had a PhD and it was actually an honorary doctorate from one of those fake Christian schools. So he didn't have anything of value. He's a guy who wrote a book called The Jefferson Lies, uh, purportedly talking about lies about Thomas Jefferson, but it had so much misinformation in it that his Christian publishers are like, we have to pull this book from the shelves because it has too many lies. We're going to keep the Bible up on the shelves, but David Barton's book, that's too much misinformation. So they took it down from the shelves. So that's David Barton for you. And his whole career now is he goes around spreading misinformation about the founding fathers. And he's like, when America was founded, it was Christian. And here's how we know that. And then he'll quote something out of context that a founder supposedly said, and then jump to a completely illogical conclusion about it. So that's kind of what he does now. And I'm going to play you a video from Right Wing Watch in a second here, because this Monday, he called out politicians who cheat and break the rules in order to win elections. Let me repeat that. He called out politicians who cheat in order to win elections. Now, who do you think he was talking about? Could it be the people who recently got arrested for cheating in an election because they're immoral goons? Of course not. Let me play you this clip. Again, this is from Right Wing Watch. It's about 1:30. Have fun listening to this. Oh, boo. As that's playing, I realize you can't hear the audio, can you? That's okay. I will do a David Barton impression. And by impression, I mean I'll just open my mouth and lie to you. Okay, here's what David Barton said. I will show you the transcript here. Um, there we go. Generally, the Democrat Party, because he can't say Democratic, that would be too on point. The Democrat Party is a very secular party. They tend to be very secular, and the more secular you are, the less God fearing you are, which means the less restraints you have on your behavior. So if there is no God, then everything is right now, and everything is right now, and the end does justify the means. The Machiavellian thing that the end justifies the means. Republicans believe in God, Barton claimed, which is why they are not going to break the rules just to win. How do you respond to that? Donald Trump was just arrested for leading a conspiracy to overturn an election to the point that every juror was like, "Oh, yeah, he totally did that and so did these 18 other people along with him." All of that happened because they are sore losers and also Republicans who can't win the popular vote in that state. But David Barton's like, yeah, well, all those godless people, I mean, what's stopping them from cheating? Well, the people who constantly cite God were the ones who cheated. They're called Republicans. They stormed the Capitol to overturn an election. They pressured people to find votes that never existed. They literally get convicted of voting multiple times. Like all those election fraud stories, they always involve Republicans doing this shit. So that's David Barton for you. He just talks as if no one watches actual news, which, to be fair, for his audience is probably true. They listen to him, they filter their news through him, so they probably don't realize how badly Republicans are cheating the system. And this idea that if you're godless, you don't have any moral restraints, that doesn't make any sense either. I have quoted this before because I love it, but my buddy, a sociologist named Phil Zuckerman, he wrote an article years ago for Salon in which he basically said on every single metric of morality, like how do you measure morality? There's a lot of ways to do it, but on basically every single metric, atheists come out ahead no matter what survey you want to use. And look at this paragraph because I love this paragraph. In terms of who supports helping refugees, affordable healthcare for all, accurate sex education, death with dignity, gay rights, trans rights, animal rights, and as to who opposes militarism, government use of torture, the death penalty, corporal punishment, and so on, the correlation remains the most secular Americans exhibit the most care for the suffering of others, while the most religious exhibit the highest levels of indifference. I love that. And by the way, you could see the highlights in that paragraph because he has links to all the surveys that show all this. But the point is, if you want to live in a society that is moral, however you define morality, if you define it by any of those terms, you can point to any country in the world, any Western country where religion just isn't popular. You look at Scandinavia, you look at some of those European countries, you look at Canada, like on so many moral issues, they are doing so much better than places like the United States that are overwhelmingly religious. And we're all better off because of it. And by the way, to the claim that David Barton made that, Democrats are secular, like that's not true either. The Democratic Party is not a secular party. I wish they were, you guys. I wish it was a party full of atheists, but the Democrats are not an atheist party. I promise you, they don't reach out to atheists when they're trying to campaign for votes either. Um, just to give you some numbers here, because I looked this up. Of the Democrats who are in Congress right now, 76% are Christian, 12% are Jewish, 4% belong to other religions. That's overwhelmingly everyone in Congress. More than 90% of Democrats in Congress are religious. one dude, Jared Huffman of California in the House, is openly humanist. And then there's Kirsten Sinema, but I don't want to take any credit for her being openly unaffiliated. But Democrats are not godless in Congress. So none of that makes any sense. And Kyle Mantyla of Right Wing Watch, he actually pointed out that David Barton, of all people, should know that Republicans do this sort of shit because check this out. Barton, of course, has a history of projecting his own side's illegality onto Democrats, such as when he proclaimed in 2019 that Christian candidates would never illegally harvest ballots shortly after North Carolina had to schedule a new election because the Republican candidate, who Barton had endorsed, had engaged in illegal ballot harvesting. That's David Barton for you. None of that stuff matters because his career is dedicated to spreading lies to an audience of Christians who are even less good at critical thinking than he is. It's infuriating. I think what makes me really mad is there are prominent Republican politicians who parrot what David Barton says. Like, it's not like David Barton's comments only get said in a bubble and nowhere else and only a handful of people hear it. They make their way to Christian nationalist legislation and legislators. And then this stuff gets into the public record. It's extremely frustrating. While we are talking about this, is an interesting question from Michael here. I'm still waiting for the time when an open atheist is a viable candidate for president in the U.S. I'm halfway with you on that. I don't particularly care if an open atheist is running for president. Like, I'm fine with voting for Christians for president. I've done it in every election. So it doesn't bother me if someone's religious as long as they respect church-state separation. I think, I guess I'll pose this question to you all. What do you think it would take for an open atheist to be a viable candidate? And I think the answer would be you just need a good, charismatic, popular candidate who just happens to be an atheist. And I think this is the way it seems to be going. I've kept track for several years now of state level and federal candidates who run for office who are openly non-religious. And the ones who typically get elected, most of them who get elected, and there's a lot of them, several dozens of people who are openly non-religious in state or federal office, what they say is that when they're campaigning, religion is irrelevant. They don't campaign on it. They don't talk about it. They'll be honest with you if you ask. But really, if they say, like, oh, what religion are you? You know, I'm not religious, but I'll tell you why my values and your values align. Let me tell you why I care about taking care of the potholes. Let me tell you why I care about your kids' education. That stuff transcends religious differences in politics anyway. And so a good candidate knows how to address issues that can pull people together, whether it's the economy, whether it's just taking care of local stuff, streets, garbage, things like that. And then religion doesn't matter as much. Like, religion should not matter in a city council race. It really shouldn't play a big role in low level elections. It'll matter a little more in state level elections because culture war issues will crop up there. And obviously, it'll make a bigger deal in national elections where they can set the agenda for everybody. But for, I don't know, 99% of elections across the country, religion is irrelevant as long as you are doing what's good for the community. So, to answer your question, I don't think it'll be long before an open atheist is a viable candidate. But I think if that happens, it's not going to be because this person is famous for being an atheist and then runs for office. It'll be because a really good candidate just doesn't get asked about religion or like doesn't talk about it because it doesn't matter. And then one day they'll just kind of come out and say, oh, yeah, I don't believe in God. But let me tell you what I'm going to do for you if you elect me. That's how an atheist is going to get in office, regardless of what office it is. I want to jump to one last story here because I found this one fascinating. It comes from the Barna Group, which is a Christian research organization. And there was one thing in there that I wanted to show all of you. It's this survey right here. Check this out. So this is from the Barna Group. They surveyed a bunch of Protestant senior pastors. And whoops, there we go. There we go. They did it in 2015. They interviewed these pastors in 2015, then again in 2022. And look at the question at the very top here. It is becoming harder to find mature young Christians who want to become pastors. That's an interesting thing because they're basically saying, do you have a succession plan, pastors? Are there young people who want your job? And you could see at the top here in 2015, uh, can you see this? I hope you could see this. In 2015, 24% of pastors said, I agree strongly. It's really hard to find a succession plan. 45% of them agreed somewhat. And look at the numbers now in 2022. 34% of pastors say, yeah, I really have a hard time finding young people to take my spot. And yeah, 41% say they agree somewhat, but that's a bigger chunk than it was before overall. So all these pastors are saying it's really hard to find young people who want to become pastors later on in life. And some of that has to do with a society that's just getting older in general. We have this like gerontocracy where Mitch McConnell and Dianne Feinstein and people like that, and Nancy Pelosi now, and Biden and Trump, and they're all in their late 70s, early 80s, and they refuse to step off. There's no bench. They're not trying to build up a bench. They're not looking very hard to see who's going to take up their mantle in the future. That's part of it. Um, but the weird thing is churches I thought they were actually pretty good at having a pipeline because they have so many programs in place where you could be a full-time Christian if you wanted to. You could run a college group. You could be a youth pastor. That's supposed to, I thought, be a segue into becoming, a regular pastor. I know it's not the same job. It's not like minor leagues to major leagues. But again, like there's so many ways that if you wanted to be a professional Christian, and I mean that in a good way, you could do it if you wanted to. So I thought they had that in place. But on the other hand, I'm going to show you this here. Like seminaries have seen a decline in enrollment. Christian colleges are closing. Church attendance is going down. Young people are less religious than ever before. Look at this survey. This is not from Barna. This is from the Survey Center on American Life, but basically more than a third of Gen Z identifies as religiously unaffiliated. And basically, if you look at the top right, the top row, I know it's a little hard to see because it's really tiny. I'll try to blow it up here a little bit. That top line here, the dark part on the far left there is white evangelical Protestant. And as you get younger, that black bar is getting smaller and smaller. That's a smaller share of evangelical Christians. That purple part of the graphs on the right, you can see the percentage of unaffiliated people is getting larger and larger the younger you go. So Christians are kind of losing options there, which is an interesting thing to bring up as well. The Christian Post also mentioned that some Christian denominations, like the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, they said they had a shortage of at least 600 pastors. So what's going to happen? That means those churches, when the pastor who's there right now dies or retires, there's no one to take their spot. And if they can't recruit someone else, those churches are going to fold up. They're going to get sucked into a larger church or something like that. So mega churches will get larger. There are those jobs are not going away. But what's going to happen when a lot of these churches die out? Like it's weird that there's no farm system in place for white evangelical Christians, and that seems strange. Then again, what would it even mean if they had a good pipeline? Because the most popular pastors in the country, they're not in charge because they have theological degrees or they worked their way up in church. They're just people who took over a church and happen to have a lot of charisma. Like Joel Osteen got his church because his father basically died and he took over. People like Greg Locke, Mark Driscoll, they founded their church and then they realized that if they just yell on stage and act alpha male-ish, they're going to attract a lot of followers. If you mix like Andrew Tate with Bible verses, you'll get a following. And they figured that out, and that's their whole thing. But none of them are known for like their theology. They're not known for being experts in the Bible. They're just good at commanding an audience and getting attention on stage. They know how to yell in front of a camera. Like, I'm not even joking when I say this. I think you're going to see a whole generation of pastors who are not trained in seminary. And I'm talking about the more popular pastors here in the future. They're not trained in seminary. They're trained on YouTube. They watch a lot of guys, the Joe Rogan types of people. They learn how to talk like that because they see it all the time. And then they just throw Bible verses into it, and they call themselves a pastor, and they can, because you don't need formal training to be a pastor in some denominations. And that's it. They will amass an audience. That's how right-wing websites always work. That's how right-wing audiences work. That's how Vivek Ramaswamy works. If you yell in Christianese or you yell in conservative code, you will get positive attention. And if you know how to do that, and you're telegenic, and you know how to smile and act confident when you do it, like, there's a lot of people who will flock to you. And that's not good. That's not good for the country, because the types of people, first of all, if you follow people like that, I'm worried about you. And if you are people like that, it's not like they're yelling on stage about let's help refugees, let's feed the poor. It's always like, let's keep women in line. Let's take over their bodies. Let's make sure trans people can't do XYZ. Even younger evangelical Christians, by the way, even though they are less likely to agree on culture war issues compared to their parents' generations, the people who want to be pastors are not the more progressive Christians we are talking about. Like, I don't know. If older pastors are worried that no one wants to take over their churches, maybe they should be asking why young people are not necessarily drawn to their churches. Because if they're only preaching politics, or they're only preaching bigotry and sexism, maybe the sort of people you want taking over your churches don't want to be there. And if you're not going to take sexual abuse seriously, and if you're replacing the Bible with the GOP platform or whatever Trump says, which is the same thing, then maybe a lot of young people don't want to be part of that. And then you're losing the good people who might want to take over churches like yours. And the weird thing is, this isn't even like the Catholic Church, where we're asking young people to swear off sex and marriage. These are Protestant churches where you could do all that. You could have your family, and still they can't find people who want to take their places. Part of me thinks a lot of young Christians, they don't want to be a pastor for the same reason you don't want to do like PR for Twitter, or you don't want to do PR for like a tobacco company. Like, yeah, it's a job, and yeah, you'll get paid for it. But if you have to explain what you do for a living, the last thing you want is for everyone to be like, oh no, oh God, that's your job? And who wants to do that your entire life? Because the gospel message these days is never about being more like Jesus. It's more like, let me tell you all the conspiracy theories on Newsmax right now. So that's a problem for the church. But if it's a problem for the churches, and especially Protestant churches, that means it's going to be a problem for literally all of us, because those are the people who are going to set the political agenda in the future. So that should be scary. Let me jump. What is this comment right here? My Catholic friend, who I really like, fails to understand the importance of church-state separation. How would you respond? Thank you, Piao Meow Noir, for the comment. How would I respond about church-state separation? I think church-state separation is good for the church, and it's good for the state. If those two things are separate, everyone wins. Do you know what happens when you don't have church-state separation in places like Europe? Go figure out what the religion rate is in parts of Europe where they have a national church and they have an official religion and it's some brand of Christianity. You know what happens? No one goes to church. No one calls themselves Christians, because those things are intermingled and you want nothing to do with it. In the United States, where we have supposedly church-state separation, people are religious, overwhelmingly so. But really, we don't want the state telling churches what they can or cannot do, but we also don't want like our government run by what certain denominations want, because when that happens, it's always one denomination that just has a lot of power. And if they're dictating things that work in their religion, it doesn't work for the rest of the country. You're just going to get blowback against your church and your denomination. It's a bad idea. Like, churches can have their own policies. No one is saying the Catholic Church can't be bigots, can't be sexist. I mean, it's bad strategy. It's bad for everybody, but they can do it. Evangelicals, Southern Baptists, they can be as ignorant, as sexist, as racist as they want to be. It's bad, but you can do it. But when churches say, oh, you know what, we don't like abortion, so we think no one should have access to it at all, now you're forcing your views on everybody else. What happens when the state runs that? They say, okay, in theory, people can have access to abortions. People can have same sex marriages. If you don't want to do it, you don't have to. You have the choice. We're not forcing your church to do anything. That's a better move for everybody. So church state separation doesn't hurt people who are religious. It strengthens your ability to set your boundaries as you see fit without alienating everybody else who doesn't agree with you. And then it's up to you to persuade everyone else to join your people, to join your tribe. So, I mean, church state separation is not bad for religious people because no one's making you do anything. I guess I would ask your friend, your Catholic friend, like, what are you worried about if church state separation was implemented in full as it should be? What do you think would happen? Because the Catholic Church's beliefs wouldn't change. No one would force your Catholic Church to do anything that it didn't want to do. So I think that would be good for everybody. Let me jump a couple last things and then I'll call it a night here. You know, I had to give you at least one transformed wife quotation here. And let me start with this one, which made me laugh so freaking hard. Oh, right. Share tab. That's what I want to do. Boom. I'm going to let you all just read this one. This is a real ass tweet that she did. And I'm trying to make sense of it. I read this thing like 8 times to try to make sense of it because it's not even in response to anything. She just starts. Who is she? I don't know who she is. She's not referring to anybody. She is thinking of putting her young son into the public school. I warned her that they may ask him if he wants to be a girl. If she doesn't want him to be, they will take him from her, cut off his penis, and give him hormones. Protect your children, mothers. I taught at a public school. I do not remember, I don't remember ever doing that. I don't remember wanting to do that. I don't remember my colleagues ever wanting to do that. I really don't remember having the time to do that, even if I wanted to, because I had other things I had to teach. I think I'm bothered by the fact that people like her, um, they're the biggest critics of public schools. And they spread these lies about the indoctrination that takes place in public schools and, how they're forcing trans on your kids and forcing them to read these books that promote, whatever culture war thing they want to talk about. They know the least about what actually happens in public schools. They have no clue what teachers are doing, what administrators have to put up with. It makes absolutely no sense. And again, the sort of people who follow her totally believe this is how it works. Like, here's how it works in public schools. Hey, kid, on the roster, it says your name is Samantha. What should I call you? Sam? Okay. Cool, we're done. That's the end of that conversation. And if someone says, I go by this name, and it's not the one I see, it's like, whatever, fine. Now go do your math homework. Like, that's how the conversation goes. I do not care what's between their legs. All these people are obsessed with what's between your kids' legs. I will tell you, I know a lot of teachers, none of them care what's between your kids' legs because they're trying to do their job. So, but this sort of thinking, like, I know some of you think she's satire. She's not satire. She's a human being. She's real. She makes videos. She's real. But there are groups, the Moms for Liberty groups, any group with liberty in their name. They're all like this. They all believe this bullshit. And if they don't call them out on this stuff. So that was a tweet. And then I can't just stop there. Let me give you one more from the transformed wife. Here's your end of the day. This was interesting too. This is her argument for why women should not be working. Adultery has dramatically increased since women left their homes for the workforce. When you put men and women together all day long, it's the perfect recipe for adultery. God wants women to be keepers at home and helpmeets to their husbands for many good reasons. This is one. Her argument here is women should not work because if you put two people next to each other, if you put men and women next to each other in the workplace, this is all they will do all day, which suggests that no one has any self-control, which suggests all of these men and women who have careers, that's what they want to do, that they have no obligations to their partners. That's an interesting theory there. It also suggests that if men just work around men all day and they have sex with each other, that's totally fine. If I'm reading her correctly here, the steel mill is a fine place to work if you watched The Simpsons 20 years ago. But like in her mind, women shouldn't work because if they work with men, the banging will happen. And therefore, because no one can keep it together, women should stay at home and serve their husbands and cook dinner all day and homeschool their kids. And if everyone just stays in their Christian bubble / condom, nothing bad will ever happen. That's her world for you. And that's the world that a lot of evangelical megachurches tell their people. That's abstinence only sex education for you. That's what evangelical women teach like young girls. That's also, by the way, like the Mike Pence rule or the Billy Graham rule. I can't be in a room with another woman who's not my wife, even in a professional setting, because who knows what'll happen. My pants might accidentally fall down, or she will accuse me of doing something indecent. And it's like, dude, that's not how it works. You can just be professional and she'll be professional and you'll get your jobs done and it's fine. Like it's amazing that this is the mindset that these people really do. Forget her tweet for a second. These people really do think if you put men and women together who are not married, then only one thing will happen in that interaction. And it's like, I know all of you are thinking this too. Like, we all have platonic friends who are of the same sex or of a different sex or whatever. And it's fine. We're friends. It's, you can have friends or not have friends. I'm not pretending like I have friends, plural, at all. But like, that's the point. You can have friends. It improves your life to have these friends, and to suggest that once you get married, you cut off all ties with the opposite sex for life. And that also assumes you're going to be married forever, that there's no other alternative there whatsoever, that every marriage always works out perfectly. Because then what happens? What happens if you actually go through with the divorce in her situation? Because now you basically cut off pretty much everyone in your life too. I don't know. It is messed up. Thank you for this. I appreciate it. That makes, I think I'm up to 3 friends now. This is great. I think I'm done with stories for today because it's Friday. But if you do have questions, I will check them out. If you have any super likes, I appreciate it. I have to plug this again because I'm the boss and I said I have to plug this, so I'm going to do that here. But I will take your questions if you have any. I'm just reading over the comments before I sign off because you guys are hilarious when you're talking about the transformed wife. Uh, this is mean, but you're not wrong. I still say Fundy Snark Uncensored is the best place. It's my what do you call it? It's It's what I enjoy reading the most. I'm losing the charm because it's late at night. Oh, this is interesting. 8 passengers. Is that the Mormon mother who just got arrested for abusing her child, or abusing her kids? Tell me if I have this wrong. I don't have this in front of me. Um, I was not familiar with her until last week when she got arrested, and I think the story is that this woman, made videos about her life. She's vlogging for years here. She amassed a following of a couple million people, but, she talked about how she would do these things to her kids to keep them in line, and some of them were really abusive. And last week, like one of her kids, one of her many, many kids, like ran out of a house that was not her house, it was her friend's house, but he was like in masking tape, duct tape, and like tied up or whatever it was, and escaped and ran to get help. And then they found another kid in the same house, her kid, who was malnourished. And now they took away all this lady's kids and they arrested the mother. And I think the bottom line is, one, good that she got arrested, but two, like, one, she amassed a following and she was pushing this idea that you have to discipline your kids if you want to keep them in line. And the way you discipline, like when you read those books to train up a child or anything like that, it was duct tape, says a commenter. They talk about how you have to, spare the rod, spoil the child. You have to hit your kids, but then they pretend they're like, we didn't say beat them. We didn't say leave marks. You just have to do that or something. And then they recommend like the size of the whip or the size of the rod or whatever. And we talked about this before, but like in the Shiny Happy People documentary about the Duggars, one of the things they talked about in terms of how they abuse the kids was the thing where you keep a baby on a mat on the floor when it can barely crawl. And if it gets off the mat, you like punish it. You abuse the child to get back onto the mat. And that's a form of training. And if you're watching that, you're like horrified because why would you hurt a baby for crawling? That's what babies do. And but they just think discipline of all forms, starting at a young age before they have any capability of reasoning or anything. That's the way to do it. This woman, the 8 passengers woman, she took that to an extreme. And like it's not like this was a secret until last week. She was bragging about this stuff on YouTube, like, oh yeah, I'm not gonna feed my child tonight because she did something wrong and she deserves no food and she'll learn her lesson. And she did things like that. This is interesting. Yeah, she got involved with a counselor that was endorsed and recommended by the Mormon Church. The kids were found at the counselor's house, and the friend is in jail too. Yeah, glad to hear that. I mean, my God, I my heart goes out to those children. I know at least one of the kids, maybe the oldest kid, was doing some sort of Instagram reel, maybe it was TikTok or something, basically saying like, "Good, I'm glad my mom got arrested. I wasn't a part of this, but like she needed to get punished for this stuff." So, what happens to these other kids though? Like, what happens to even if they're out of the house and even if they're away from her? What's going to happen to them? I don't know. Uh, I hope they're in good hands very soon. I hope they're okay. It's so scary. Thank you to this person for the donation. I really appreciate it. But yeah, thanks for asking that question about her. I'm still wondering. I don't even, when I saw that story, my first thought is, I don't know who this woman is. I've never paid attention to her. And then, of course, I saw a lot of articles about it. And then it's like, oh, now it's overwhelming. Now I don't even know where to start with her. I have seen, if you haven't seen this yet, if you go on YouTube and talk about 8 passengers or this woman who got arrested, you'll find compilation clips of some of the things she talked about. And they're horrifying. Like, as a parent, they are horrifying things she was saying about what she does to her kids. Thank you for this. I appreciate it. I have no idea how much that is. That's either 4 cents or $10 or something else, and I don't know. But thank you so much. I appreciate it. Um, Man, what a horrible story that was. Um, I'm bringing this up here. They go into foster care, and the foster care system is awful. I don't know if I agree with this, that anyone who's been in foster care who is not abused. I do know people who are foster parents. I know people who've been in the foster care system and they've come out okay. But the implication there is you need good foster parents who know how to who know how to take care of kids who need a safe home to be in, and you want the best for them. So like for those kids, I can't imagine they're going to be in a worse situation than they were with their mother. But like you wish that they had someone in their life who's looking out for them and will help them out. So okay. With that, I'm going to call it a night. Thank you all. Thank you all for watching. I appreciate it. By the way, I am looking for someone to help me moderate comments when I do this next week. If you're interested, send me an email or send me a message on. You'll find me. Just Google it online. You'll find access to me, and I would really appreciate that. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful night, everyone.